Good morning. It's Monday, January 6, 2025, and welcome to the Leading News, a new daily podcast powered by the Albuquerque Journal. I'm Gino, and on this new podcast, each weekday we'll dive into that day's stories with in-depth interviews with our reporters, get you caught up on all the headlines from our newsroom, and provide you with that day's forecast. On this inaugural episode, I'm joined by Albuquerque Journal Reporter Olivier Uyttebrouck to discuss Legal Aid New Mexico making significant layoffs to its staff, including their attorneys, and what the fallout of these layoffs could mean for New Mexicans across the state. I'll also be looking at other headlines from our newsroom, including sports, and we'll take a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast coming right up on the Leading News. New Mexico Legal Aid, a nonprofit providing free legal services to low-income residents, plans to lay off 26 of its 120 staff members, including 13 attorneys. The nonprofit is making this move due to an anticipated 17% budget cut in 2025. The cut follows the end of COVID-era emergency funding and ongoing federal funding uncertainties. The organization handled over 15,000 requests in 2024, assisting clients in housing, domestic violence, and consumer law cases. Executive Director Sonia Belafont emphasized the challenges of maintaining services amid rising demand and funding shortfalls. Judicial leaders are urging state lawmakers to increase support for civil legal aid to address the growing need. I'm now joined by Albuquerque Journal reporter Olivier Uyttebrouck, who's been following this story. Oliver, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So, Oliver, how did we get here to where Legal Aid is now laying off some of their staff?
Well, they experienced some growth during the pandemic because they had some fairly substantial funding increase as a result of the pandemic. They got some additional ARPA funding. They were able to grow, but all of that ARPA funding is going away. It went away in December. So they're expecting budget cuts in 2025 that will require some pretty serious layoffs, amounting to about a fifth of its 120-person workforce. And that includes 13 of their 70 attorneys. So, we're looking at some pretty serious layoffs here. 5 of those attorneys are going to be in Albuquerque and 5 in Santa Fe. Gallup, Las Cruces, Roswell will also be affected by this. They received a lot of additional funding during the pandemic. And they grew from about 54 attorneys back in 2019 to they have a total of 70 attorneys today.
So, Oliver, can you tell me a little bit about Legal Aid? What are they exactly and what kind of services do they provide?
Well, they've been around for about half a century, and they provide civil legal services for low-income New Mexicans. So if you're charged with a crime, you're guaranteed a public defender if you can't afford an attorney. If you have a civil legal problem, you're not entitled to an attorney at public expense. So you have to turn to a nonprofit or represent yourself. And Legal Aid, is one of several nonprofits that provide all sorts of legal services for, housing, including tenant-landlord disputes, tax problems. They provide aid for Native Americans, senior affairs, all sorts of, economic and consumer problems. And they also represent people in some domestic violence situations, people seeking protection orders and so forth. So, they're very important. They're an important part of the legal system here in New Mexico, where you have a lot of low-income people.
And Oliver, you got a chance to talk to the executive director of Legal Aid New Mexico about what possible impacts could come from these layoffs. What did she tell you?
Well, Sonia Belafont is the executive director, and I was able to contact her this week. She's concerned about it, certainly.
It's disheartening to me as a new resident in New Mexico that there is such a great amount of need, particularly given our low-income population. And so even as we stand here with the number of attorneys we have currently, for every one attorney, there are about 14,000 individuals eligible for our services, approximately. So that means that, unfortunately, that our ability to reach those individuals who need representation or information so they can be empowered to represent themselves. That means there are fewer individuals we're actually going to be able to reach.
But they are seeking some additional state funding. They're planning to seek some additional funding from the state legislature that may make up part of their shortfall this year. They're seeking an $860,000 increase in the budget for the Civil Legal Services Commission, which funds not only New Mexico Legal Aid, but other groups like the New Mexico Center on Law and Poverty, some other groups that provide legal services for low-income people. There's going to be an op-ed in the Sunday Journal by Justice Shannon Bacon and District Judge Aaron O'Connell that's going to outline that. So keep an eye out for that as well.
And Oliver, you alluded to that op-ed that was written by several judges here in the state. For members of the judicial branch here in New Mexico to be taking time to write something to address this issue of legal aid losing its funding really kind of just shows how important these services are to residents of the state.
Yes, in a state that is as poor as New Mexico, it certainly is a big deal if, an organization that provides legal services for low-income people is going to be losing some serious funding in 2025. That's a big deal. We're hoping that some additional state funding will come through. There's a lot of uncertainty, really. Congress may or may not cut their funding in the coming year. A lot of it depends on how the budget shakes out in the Congress this year. But it is a Republican-controlled Congress, so there's no telling what might happen between now and March when the continuing resolution expires.
So, Oliver, now that the federal funding is in question for legal aid, we've touched a little bit on the fact that they might have to start seeking statewide funding in order to continue services. What have you heard about their plans as far as that goes, and what appeals they hope to make to lawmakers?
Well, it has some support from, a Supreme Court justice, and I would imagine judges support this as well. At least one district court judge is supporting it, judging from the op-ed that we're going to be publishing on Sunday. So they're seeking, it would amount to about a 12% increase in the budget for the State Civil Legal Services Commission, which funds not only legal aid, but a number of different organizations that provide funding for civil litigation.
Oliver, I know we've touched on it a couple times during this conversation about the impact if legal aid does not secure state funding, disruptions to the services they provide. But what are they doing now to try to help avoid any sort of massive disruptions?
Well, I know that, according to Sonia Belafont, they are going to try to mitigate the effects. They're trying to wrap up the cases that they can.
We, as attorneys and as professionals, we work to make sure that we are doing everything we can to transition cases and clients so that they do not feel the impact. We are working hard to close outstanding cases as we go into the new year for 2025, and that will give us some bit of reprieve as we look at case coverage for post-layoff.
But, when you're losing a substantial number of your attorneys, there's something is going to have to give. There is going to be an impact.
Yeah, and when you really look at it, Oliver, in a state of 2 million people, in layoffs that are affecting offices in different cities all over the state, every New Mexican is really going to feel the effects of this.
Yeah, the New Mexico Legal Aid serves a number of different communities in the state, and every office is going to experience some share of the pain.
So New Mexico Legal Aid now pinning their hopes on the legislature, which starts later on this month, hoping to convince some local lawmakers to provide some funding so they can continue operating here for the citizens of New Mexico. Albuquerque Journal reporter Olivier Uyttebrouck with the latest on the story. I would imagine you'll be following it a little bit more as well. Oliver, thank you so much for joining me.
All right. Thank you, Gino.
In other headlines from the newsroom, the Albuquerque home featured as Walter White's residence in Breaking Bad is on the market for $4 million, which is a steep jump from its $343,000 Zillow evaluation. The 1,900-square-foot house at 3828 Piermont Northeast attracted global fanfare with hundreds of visitors daily especially during events like Albuquerque's Balloon Fiesta. Memorable moments like fans reenacting the pizza on the roof scene have even led to the installation of a fence. The current owner, who has lived at the home for over 50 years, is selling not to escape the house's fame, but to start a new chapter after decades of family history. The listing team sees it as a, quote, global attraction rather than a standard residential property, targeting buyers looking to turn it into a fan-centered venture like an Airbnb or a museum. The sale aims to preserve the home's legacy as a cultural icon for fans worldwide. Roderick Norseweather, 25, and Tajne Johnson, 21, are accused of trafficking two California teens, ages 14 and 15, to Albuquerque for sex work. Police discovered the younger teen soliciting at Central and Rhode Island. Prosecutors, calling the allegations, quote, appalling, are seeking to hold the pair without bail. Court records revealed that Norseweather was on probation for burglary, while Johnson had an outstanding warrant for assault. Now in sports, the conflict at Cleveland Wrestling Tournament showcased some of New Mexico's top talent, with many of the Class 5A's elite securing individual titles. Held at the Rio Rancho Event Center, the prestigious event featured over 70 schools from 5 states, serving as a preview for next month's state tournament. On the boys' side, standout performances included Mason Poisa from La Cueva, chasing his 4th state title, and Roman Luttrell from Cleveland, who is a 3-time state champion, competed in the tournament despite recovering from an illness. Cleveland's boys dominated overall, winning the team title with 260.5 points. For the girls, multiple-time state champion Jaden Meadows from Sandia made a triumphant season return, pinning all of her opponents at 165 pounds after recovering from knee surgery. Cleveland's girls also took the team title with standout victories from Elleroy's Woosley and Sophia Rimbert. This highly anticipated event drew fierce competition from in-state and out-of-state wrestlers, setting the stage for an exciting state championship next month. Looking for something to do today? The National Museum of Nuclear Science and History is hosting a Sciences Everywhere camp taking place today from 7:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. A plant swap is taking place at the Lost Cultures Tea Bar that takes place from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. A free tango class is available at Porto del Tango from 6 p.m. to 6:45 p.m. And lastly, Bourbon and Boots is hosting a karaoke tonight that starts at 8 p.m. Now taking a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast. Today you can expect partly sunny skies with a high near 49, before temperatures dip down to 21 degrees and mostly cloudy skies this evening. As for tomorrow, partly sunny skies are expected again with a high near 41, and on Tuesday night there is a 30% chance of snow, mostly cloudy, with a low around 17. To keep up with all the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal, you can visit our website at abqjournal.com. For the leading news, I'm Gino Gutierrez.